We're in the book of Ruth. We've been tracing the promises of God. We started in Genesis, we went to Exodus. We've gone through each of the books up until Ruth and looking at promises that God made, and then we're going into the Bible and determining whether God actually kept that promise. He's made us Christians in the church age, He's made us a lot of promises. And how can we know whether He keeps His promise? How can we know whether we can trust Him or not, unless we can go into the book and see He made a lot of promises in the book and He's kept every single one of them. And that's why we're going through this study, this Promises of God study. And when we got to the book of Ruth, I was going to pick the promise and move on, but we just had to stop for a little bit. It's only 4 chapters. It won't take us but a couple of weeks to get through it, and it's worth going through the book of Ruth. While everybody, it seems, in Israel is disobeying God, walking away from Yahweh, what we see in Ruth is this Gentile woman, a Gentile woman who's become a widow, destitute in Moab, decide to follow her mother-in-law and follow her mother-in-law's God, Yahweh, at all costs. She is a hero in the Scripture. Ruth is. The book of Ruth is about advancing the promise that's given to the tribe of Judah by Father Jacob. This is the promise. Advancing and preserving the promise to the tribe of Judah. That's what we see in the book of Ruth. That the promise made to Judah that the king's staff, that the kings of Israel would come through the 4th son of Jacob, the boy named Judah. In Genesis 49:10, Jacob, the father, is going one by one through all of his 12 sons and giving them prophecy about what their future is going to be. And when he gets to Judah, this is what he says: the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. So Jacob, the father, the patriarch, says to Judah, of all my 12 sons, the kings, the authorities in Israel will come through this family right here. Through you, son, Judah. Yehuda is the way you spell his name. I haven't said this in a long time, but by the way, the name Yehuda is where we get the nickname Jew. This is why the Jews are called Jews, because of the son Judah. This is where the word comes from. It's got no secret Hebrew meaning or understanding. It's simply a shortened form of the word Yehuda, Judah. That's where Jew comes from. So Jacob tells Judah, and this is the promise that we're tracing through the book of Ruth, that in the tribe of Judah, from the families of Judah, will come the kings of Israel until Shiloh comes. We talked a lot about that. To him shall be the obedience of the people. Shiloh, we saw, the word means to whom it belongs. The right to rule ultimately belongs only to Shiloh. And in a couple of sessions ago, I don't think it was last session, but the one before, we talked more about Shiloh being the Lord Jesus Christ. Ultimately, the King of Israel, who has not only the right to rule Israel, but to rule the entire world. Shiloh, the one to whom the right to rule belongs. So the promise is the scepter, the rulership, will not leave the tribe of Judah until one day a man comes to earth from and through the tribe of Judah, and to that man will truly belong the right to rule. And his name, his title here, one of the names for Jesus Christ, is Shiloh. That's what the word means. So what we see in the book of Ruth, just quickly, is Yahweh showing us the family tree of Shiloh. The promise made is that Judah would be the kings, and one day the ultimate king, Shiloh, would come. Ruth, the story of Ruth, shows us a little bit of that family tree as the tribe of Judah moves through the period of the judges, and the promise is intact. It is the tribe of Judah that the kings will come from. It is from the body of Ruth that the grandfather of King David will come from. This woman will become a Jew. She'll assimilate into the Jewish world by marrying Boaz, and she will father the grandson, or the grandfather, of King David. The promise continues through Ruth. So what we see is Yahweh showing us the family tree of Shiloh more clearly in and through the tribe of Judah. The promise is Judah will be the kings, and that's what the promise is in Ruth. That's what we see. The promise continues. Yahweh will use a faithful Moabite woman. She's a Gentile from Moab. She's not Jewish. She's a Gentile from Moab. She's a cousin of the Jews, but she's not a Jew. So Yahweh will use a faithful Moabite woman and a faithful Jewish man to birth the grandfather of King David. The man's name is Boaz. We'll see him later. Jesus Christ, the Jewish Messiah Savior, is in the direct family tree of King David. Why is it important that we know where David came from? Because Jesus is a grandson of King David. He's a son of Judah. Jesus is in the family, in the tribe of Judah, and it's important. If the scepter shall not depart from Judah, and the ruler's staff will not depart from Judah until one day a man comes who has the right to rule, we have to know. We have to be told in the Bible that Jesus is from the tribe of Judah and that Jesus is in the kingly line of King David. Otherwise, Jesus of Nazareth, as wonderful as he may be, isn't qualified to be the king. He's not qualified to be Messiah. Unless he's from the tribe of Judah and in the direct family tree of the kings of Judah, David specifically, Jesus doesn't qualify. And that's why when you get to the book of Matthew, the very first thing that Matthew does, because Matthew's writing a book to the Jews to prove to the Jews that the king has come. What's the very first thing you see in Matthew chapter 1? The genealogy of Jesus Christ. What names do you think we're looking for? Abraham, Judah, David. And if those three names don't show up, if Abraham's not there, the man's not a Jew. If Judah doesn't show up, he's in the wrong tribe. He can't be king. He can't be Shiloh. Because Jacob said Judah will be the king and Shiloh will be from the tribe of Judah. And if he's not from King David, he's in the wrong family tree. So we see two times in the Bible, in the book of Matthew, Matthew immediately starts by saying there's only one on earth qualified to be Messiah, and that is Jesus of Nazareth, and he gives us his family tree, his genealogy. Luke starts telling the story, and by the time Luke gets to chapter 3, he backs up and gives the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Because we have to know. Listen, guys, you're going to be in heaven forever. Why? Because of whom? Because of Jesus Christ. That's why. And if you don't understand, if we can't guarantee ourselves in this book that Jesus Christ is the one, we could fall for anything. We could fall for Joseph Smith and Mormonism. We could fall for Muhammad and Islam. We could fall for any of these other people that said the greater prophet wasn't Jesus, it was this guy. It happens all the time. It's nothing new, people trying to come up and be Messiah. It happened in Jesus' day several times. So we have to know the book of Ruth. We have to know where Jesus Christ came from. And that's what the book of Ruth is. God showing us, I made that promise, and through history, every now and then, God will give us a glimpse into the tribe of Judah. When everything else is going on in the book of Judges, and Deborah, Othniel, all the judges, Gideon, Samson, all the things that are going on, God stops and says, but there's something more important than any of it. I will save you. I will save the world through the tribe of Judah. And I'm going to put this story in here, the book of Ruth, so you can see that this isn't all chaotic. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know the exact woman and the exact man of the tribe of Judah through whom Jesus will come through. Let me tell you this story. And mankind can stop at the book of Ruth and say, oh, thank you, God, for this book. What a wonderful story. What a wonderful thing God has done for us by giving us the book of Ruth. Jesus of Nazareth is Shiloh. He is. We've proven it through the scriptures. He's the only one who has the right to rule both Israel and the whole world, both Jews and Gentiles. The King of all kings, the Lord over all lords, Jesus Christ. The promise made to Judah in Genesis 49:10 is that this tribe would continue being kings in Israel until the ultimate, the last, the final king. That's what I mean by ultimate, until the ultimate king arrived on earth, Jesus of Nazareth. There will never be another king of Israel. You go to the book of Kings, 1 Kings, you see, or 1 Samuel, you see this man named Saul, a Benjamite, and then God picks a king for Israel, and his name is David. And then you see through 2 Samuel, David, you go into 1 Kings, you see Solomon. 1 Kings 6 or 7, the kingdom splits, and then you see kings of the north and kings of the south, and you follow those kings of the south all the way through the book, and you get to David and Solomon, his brother Nathan. You eventually get to the man Jesus. Just an aside, in case you don't know this when you're reading the Bible, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Now, when you read 1st and 2nd Kings, now listen to what I'm saying. This will help you when you read Chronicles. When you read 1st and 2nd Kings, you get both the northern kings the northern part of that was called Israel, and the southern part, the two tribes that stay south, Judah. You get both of those kings. You get both of those lines traveling through the latter part of 1 Kings and 2 Kings. In the book of Chronicles, only the south. Only the southern kings. In the book of Chronicles, only Judah. Only the southern kings. Why is that? Do you know that in the Hebrew Bible, the book of Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, is the last book in the Hebrew Bible? Our last book in the Hebrew Bible is Malachi, but in a Hebrew Bible, the last book is the book of Chronicles. Because what the book of Chronicles is a post-exilic look back at Israel to see the priesthood, the kings and the priesthood. Chronicles is written from the viewpoint of the priesthood, worship of Yahweh. That's why in Chronicles you read a lot about the temple, a lot about the temple utensils, all the things, the priests getting reconsecrated and all these things. You don't read about that in the book of Kings. That's about kings and wars. But you get to Chronicles and it's about how did Israel worship Yahweh, and now that we're back, are we still the people of Israel? Are we still the people of God, I should say? That's what the Chronicles is. It's a look back at the history. But let me ask you one more question. I know I'm on a rabbit trail, but I got to ask this question. I like information like this. It's valuable to me. After the exile and Israel came back in the land, how many tribes of Israel altogether? 12. How many came back to the land? Remember, the northern tribes were kicked out. They were exiled by God. All 10 left the land. They went to Assyria. Some of the poorest of the land stayed. 150 years later, 150 years go by, and then the southern tribe, Judah and Benjamin, and the city of Jerusalem gets destroyed by the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar. And so the south leaves. They're kicked out by Yahweh for 70 years. After the 70 years in Babylon, who comes back? How many tribes are interested in going back to the land of Israel? I got a 9, I got a 2. Come on, chime in there.
11.
I got a 1, I got an 11. This is not bingo. The answer is 2. the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin went back into the land. That's why they call the 10 northern tribes, what do they call them? The 10 what tribes of Israel? Lost. Because they didn't come back into the land. Huh?
I must be messed up on the time, but I see they stayed on the east side of the Dead Sea.
Now, I'm talking about after 586 BC, when Israel was kicked out, exiled out of the land. They all go to Babylon. They stay there for 70 years. When they come back into the land, there's only Judah and Benjamin. Why would the chronicler, the person who wrote the Chronicles, if that's when he wrote, why would he mention anything about the 10 tribes? They didn't come back into the land. It's all the southern tribes. That's what's going on. Just an aside, let's get back to the book of Ruth. Sorry. I hope it was valuable at least a little bit. The book of Ruth is a wonderful story. It's a wonderful story of faithfulness, loyalty, kindness. I mean, Ruth is just one of the kindest souls in this book, and the way she followed her mother-in-law back into the land of Canaan. It's a story of kinsmen redeeming. We'll talk about that in just a second, where Boaz marries Ruth to keep the name of her dead husband alive. It's a wonderful story, but the most important thing that it says, that it tells us, again, is the family tree of Messiah, Shiloh, Jesus Christ, coming through the tribe of Judah. It preserves and maintains. When you're reading the book of Judges and you think, oh my goodness, all is lost. This is horrible. God says, no, all is not lost. I've got my people. I've got my faithful people on earth, and I bless them. I bless them, and Ruth and Boaz are two of those. The map. Let's look at Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came about in the days when the judges governed. That's why we know when Ruth is written. When the judges governed, that there was a famine in the land. So Israel is under the disciplinary hand of God. They have disobeyed, and that was part of the disobedience. He'd stop the rain and cause a famine. And so there's no food to eat in the land of Canaan. That's what's going on. There was a famine in the land of Canaan. A certain man of Bethlehem in Judah. Biggest word in the book, Judah. This is the tribe of Judah. A man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 children. So here's the path. Here's Bethlehem right here. This is where he met, or where they lived. And this is the path, something like this. The Moabites live down here. So they cross the Jordan River, go east to the land of the Moabites. Now, why would they go to the land of the Moabites? I wonder if God knows where every single human being on earth is, and if God sent Naomi to the place where her son would find a woman named Ruth. It's just all so perfectly planned. I say that almost sarcastically, ironically, but it's not. Why would they go to the land of Moab? Because that's where God wanted them. That's where He was going to bless Naomi in a way that she never knew was possible. So this is where we are as the story takes place. We're not in the promised land. We're to the east of the Jordan River, somewhere in the land of Moab. The name of the man was Elimelech. What's the Hebrew word for God? What's the Hebrew word for God? Look at this word. It's in this word. I'm not talking about his name. He calls himself Yahweh. I'm asking what the word for God is. El. E-L. And you see at the very beginning of this name, Eli. That means my God. Melech is the Hebrew word for king. This man's name is My God is King. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi. The names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. Ephrathites of Bethlehem. Ephratah was the name of Bethlehem before it became Bethlehem. Sometimes you see both of them. Ephratah, too small, Micah 5:2, the prophecy of Messiah being born in Bethlehem. It calls it Bethlehem Ephratah. Uses both the ancient name and the more current name, Bethlehem. Anybody know what Bethlehem means? Bethlehem? Beit is a house, and lechem is bread. the bread of life, Jesus Christ, was born in the house of bread. God, He just weaves these names together so wonderfully, doesn't it? Just the names in the Bible tell a fantastic story. So he's got 2 children, Mahlon and Chilon, unmarried. They're all Ephrathites of Bethlehem and Judah, so they're of the tribe of Judah living in Bethlehem. They entered the land of Moab and they remained there. Remember, there's nothing to eat in the tribal territory of Judah, so they cross into Moab. Just very quickly, the names. Elimelech means my God is king. Naomi means the gracious one or pleasant. The gracious or pleasant. That's what the name Naomi means. She will later want them to change her name to Marah, M-A-R-A-H, which means bitter, because she thinks God dealt bitterly with her and harshly. But the name her parents gave her was Naomi. It means the gracious or pleasant. The name Mahlon, one of their sons, means the weakly. Now, I don't know now, this is not weekly like 7 days. This is weekly like this kid is just weak. I have no idea where this boy got the name Mahlon. But you know, the Jewish tradition was to name a boy on the 8th day when they had him circumcised. So maybe they watched him for a few days and thought, we got a weak one on our hands. Who knows? But who would name their son this? Chilon means pining or suffering one. I wanted to write whiner because that's what the name means. Again, 8 days to watch him, and what do they call him at the end of that? This kid, all he does is pine and whine and is in this state of suffering all the time. These are the boys' names. Just an aside. Verse 3 says this, Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. So now she's a widow, but she's not destitute in Moab because she has 2 sons that can work and provide for her. And now we have some time go by. We don't know how long. They're in the land of Moab a total of 10 years, so a little bit of time goes by. The boys are growing up. We get to verse 4, and it says, They took for themselves Moabite women as wives. The name of the one was Orpah, the name of one of the wives, and the name of the other, Ruth. I pronounce it the way a Hebrew would, but it's a horrible sounding name. So Orpah is one of them, and the name of the other is Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. The Moabites were cousins of the Jews. Remember, Abraham's nephew's name was Lot. And when they came into the land, Abraham with his nephew Lot, they looked at all the land. Lot chose the land around Sodom and Gomorrah. Not a good choice, but that's what he wanted because it was pretty. It was well watered. It was green. Well, when they finally left Sodom and Gomorrah after God destroyed it with brimstone and fire, on the way out, remember the story, Lot's wife, what did she do? She turned around. She was longing for what she was leaving. She didn't want to leave. She turned around. That's why she was turned into salt, not because she moved her body 180 degrees, but what it was in her mind was, I want that. And so God turned her into a pillar of salt. So now Lot and his 2 daughters go into the wilderness, and the daughters decide, listen, we have no husbands. We're alone with our father. Our father's name is going to be lost. We have to get our father drunk, go into our father. Yeah, this is a disgusting story. We have to go into our father, each of us on a different night, have sexual intercourse with our drunk father so that he can get us pregnant and we can continue the family name. Wow. At that cost, continue the family name. But that's what they did. One of the sons' name was Ammon, and the other one's name was Moab. So these are Abraham's cousins. There are his great nephews. So the Moabites and the Ammonites are family to Abraham, who was the first Jew. So they're related by blood. They're family. They're great nephews to Abraham. So that's who they've married now. A Moabite woman is Ruth. Just hold on to who she is. Verse 5 says, Then Mahlon and Chilion also died. And the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. Now this made Naomi in a foreign land. Remember, she's not in Israel. She's living in the Moabite country. She is absolutely destitute and without support. That's why the Bible says so much about taking care of widows, because they are destitute. It's not like today where the women work. They're free to go to work in the workplace and earn a pay. It's not like that then. This woman would have become absolutely destitute after the death of her 2 sons. She was desperate now. Verse 6 says, Then she arose with her daughters-in-law. They're widows too now. She arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the land of Moab, for she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord Yahweh had visited his people Israel in giving them food. So she has heard while she's in Moab, I can go back now. The famine has been lifted. God has brought food. Well, it wasn't the famine. Anyway, we talked about that last time, what was happening with Gideon and the Midianites. The fact is there is food that's not being stolen from Israel anymore, so they can eat. And so she has decided and heard that Bethlehem, the house of bread, has bread again. I can go home to Bethlehem. So, verse 7, she departed from the place where she was. This is a Jewish widow with 2 daughters, 2 half-Jewish daughters-in-law. She departed from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. So when they started on this mission, not only was Ruth going with Naomi wherever she went to take care of her mother-in-law, but so was the other daughter-in-law, Orpah. They were both on this journey. In verse 8, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, I've got nothing for you. It's a gracious thing she did by giving her daughters-in-law a reason to leave. She was giving them a reason to leave. She says, Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord, this is Yahweh, who they all worshipped, may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. These are good women. These 2 Moabite women, these are good women. Good, faithful, loyal daughters-in-law to their mother-in-law, Naomi. May the Lord grant that you may find rest. What a beautiful little short prayer. May Yahweh grant you that you may find rest in your mother's houses, each in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices, and they wept, all of them crying together. This destitute situation. Verse 10, they said to her, No. So both of the daughters-in-law say, We won't leave. No, but we will surely return with you to your people, Israel, the Jews. But Naomi said, Return, my daughters. Listen to the pleading of this wonderful lady, Naomi. Don't go back with me. I've got nothing for you. Listen to what she says. Return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? What's she speaking of there? Remember quickly, because I know what time it is and I want to get through some of this. Remember the law of levirate marriage. Levirate is how I say it. Levirate marriage. Remember this law? I'm going to give it to you here just in a couple of points so you remember what's going on. Why did Naomi just say, I don't have any more sons? What does she mean by that? This is what she means. In Israel, there was a levirate law. If a brother died, another brother would marry his widow and have a child with her. That's the law of levirate marriage. I have a brother. If my brother is married and my brother gets killed, then I would take his wife, his widow, as my own wife. I would go into her sexually. She would get pregnant. And the child that she birthed would be my brother's child, not mine. That's the law of levirate marriage. to maintain the family, to maintain the ownership of what the brother had. This is how God set it up. If a brother died, another brother would take his place to make sure that he had a child. That child would be raised as the deceased brother's child. This is what Naomi is saying. Chilion and Mahlon, they had no brothers. I only had 2 boys. There is no one to take their place in levirate marriage and continue their names. Girls, we are bankrupt. We've got no hope. And I've got nothing to offer you in Israel. You have to go back to your mothers. We've got nothing. The child would be raised as the deceased brother's name to carry on his family name. It preserved the dead man's inheritance, the plot of land he lived on, and it provided support for the widow. All this levirate marriage, God taking care of widows is what this is about, because they were destitute. Naomi is saying here, by making this statement, that she's too old to have another child who can grow up and marry these women. She'll make that statement in the next verse. I don't have any babies even in my womb, and even if I did, are you going to wait around 18 years until one of these boys is old enough to be married? She urges them to go back with their mother to their mother's houses and find husbands among their own people, the Moabites. That's what Naomi wants them to do. Go home and find husbands while you're still young. Going back with me is a dead-end road. Do you sometimes feel like you're on a dead-end road just because you don't know what God is doing? God says, dead-end road, lady, you've got no idea that you will nurse the grandson of the king of Israel, the grandfather of the king of Israel. You think that this is bad, but let me do what I do. Watch me work. Stay out of my way. Continue worshiping me, and let me roll my plan forward. This Naomi, who's begging her daughters-in-law to go find Moabite husbands, will nurse Obed, the son of Boaz, the grandfather of King David. That's an amazing statement. Return, my daughters, go, she says in verse 12, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight, even if I wasn't old enough, if I had a husband and I could bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? It's an impossibility, girls. Go home where you have a life. Go make a life. I pray that Yahweh will build a life for you and bless you because of how kind you've been to me and to my husband and to my sons. Go make a life for yourselves. You wouldn't wait for them to be grown. Would you therefore refrain from marrying? Going with me is a death sentence. Your marriage opportunities are lost. No, my daughter, she says. For it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of Yahweh has gone forth against me. So Naomi recognizes in the story that Yahweh gives life and takes it away. Naomi recognizes that her husband died because Yahweh took him home, and that her sons died because Yahweh took them home. That's a good part of this story. She's a worshiper of Yahweh. Verse 14 says, they lifted up their voices and they wept again. So they want to follow the woman. She's just spoken some really good logic. This is a logical thing she's saying. I don't know if I was a woman in that place where I'd have turned around and given her a big hug and said, this is going to be very difficult to leave you, but you're right. I need to go and try to carve out a life, and with your blessing and Yahweh's blessing, maybe I will find a husband in Moab and live life. I won't have to live as a widow. They lifted up their voices and they wept. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. And that means she took the package. She left. That's not a bad thing. She simply chose to leave. That's not a negative. I don't believe there are negatives in this story. That's not a negative. It was logical. It made perfect sense that she would go home. And so she did. So Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. This word clung is the Hebrew word dabak, D-A-B-A-Q. And we find this word dabak in the beginning chapters of Genesis where it says, a husband shall leave his father and his mother and cling to his wife. In adoration, in commitment, in loyalty, in faithfulness, what we see here is Ruth holding on to her mother-in-law Naomi until death do us part. She wasn't going anywhere. She clung to this woman like she did her dear lost husband. Verse 15 says, then she said, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people. Again, Naomi trying to talk Ruth into her senses. Sweetheart, listen to what I'm telling you. This is your path into an abundant life, possibly, if Yahweh gives it to you. Naomi is a good woman. Ruth is a better daughter-in-law. She says, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people, and listen to this phrase, and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. Follow her. This is an interesting statement. She has returned. She's gone back to her people and her gods because spirituality and religion in those days was very, very tied to nationality. I'm going to ask you two questions. Just tell me what pops into your head. I say religious belief is tied into nationality. What religion are Italians? What? Makes logical sense, doesn't it? Is nationality sometimes tied into religious belief even today? What about Russians? What would the immediate thing be about a communist nation, Russia, that holds their people down? What would you think the Russian national religion is? It's that right there. Say it louder. It's atheism. It's atheism. There is a Russian Orthodox church, but I don't think there are very many of them. I think the bulk of that church is atheist. I should have asked the question about China. That would have been even more glaring. But the statement that Naomi is making is, when the girls go back to Moab, when they leave the life of a Jew, they're living as Jews. When they leave that life, they're not only leaving Naomi, but they're leaving the worship of Yahweh and going back to worship the god of Moab, who was Chemosh, C-H-E-M-O-S-H. So Naomi is releasing these girls not only to go back to their mother's house, but you can leave the God of Israel and go back to worship your national God. And I can imagine the heart of Naomi just broke just for a second. Mother, don't you see that I have become who you are? I worship Yahweh. There is no other God. But I could see where that would have been a bitter statement. Go back to your gods. Listen to what Ruth said. Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, the God that I've worshiped every day that I've been married to your son, your God will continue to be my God. What a strong woman. What a woman. Everything going on in the book of Judges that we're studying in the first hour. And what do we see here? A spiritual giant. She Jewish? Nope. But she's a worshiper of the Jewish God, Yahweh, the one true God, the God that we worship. What a giant in the Bible, this lady Ruth. Verse 17, we'll stop here. She says, where you die, I will die. Till death do us part. What a woman. And there, wherever that is, I will be buried. Thus may Yahweh do to me. What name, what God does she call on? The God of Moabites? Chemosh, no, she's left that God. She's realized that there is one God in all the universe, and his name is Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Little did Ruth know that she would be the great-grandmother of King David. Wow. He's a rewarder of loyalty and faithfulness. May the Lord Yahweh do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. What a woman. We have to stop. Let's stop right there. Almost got through it. We'll do the end of this in Ruth chapter 2 next time we meet, which won't be for about 2.5 weeks. But what a story. Hold on to these things. You know what? I wish the Bible was filled with wonderful stories like this. The fact of the matter is, it's not filled with wonderful stories like this. It's mostly filled with stories of buffoons that walked away from the worship of the one true God. But thank the Lord, He gives the remnant. And friends, we are part of the Christian remnant. He gives us stories like this, that even though things might be falling plumb apart around us, we can live the life of Ruth and live the life of Boaz right here, right now. While everybody else is saying the sky is falling, we can say, no, God's completely in control of what He's doing. Let Him work. Don't get in front of Him. Don't try to solve the problem on your own. Let God work. Stand back and see the salvation of the Lord. Let's close in prayer.